The dust swallowed the horizon, a hungry ochre wave consuming the last sliver of twilight. Sarah urged the mare onward, her own breath a raw rasp in her throat, each beat of the horse's hooves echoing the frantic rhythm of her heart. She hadn't dared look back, not since the flickering lamplight of Willow Creek had vanished behind her, taking with it the whispers and the pointed stairs. This land, harsh and unforgiving, was her last hope, a place where the wind might finally carry away the stench of gossip and the memory of a past that refused to stay buried. A jagged silhouette against the bruised sky, the old ranch house appeared less like a refuge and more like a tombstone marking the end of the world. Smoke, thin and tenuous, curled from its chimney, a surprising sign of life in the vast emptiness. She pulled the mare to a halt, the animal's sides heaving, steam rising from its damp hide. The air was cold, biting, but Sarah's skin still prickled with the phantom heat of shame. She dismounted, her legs stiff, her whole body an ache. As she approached the front porch, the door creaked open, spilling a rectangle of warm, golden light onto the packed earth. A man stood framed in the doorway, tall and weathered, with a face carved by sun and sorrow. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, held a depth that startled her. He wasn't old, not truly, but life had etched lines around his eyes and a permanent set to his jaw. He held a rifle loosely in one hand, but his gaze was not threatening, merely assessing. "Evenin'," he said, his voice a low rumble, like distant thunder. It held a weariness that mirrored her own. "Lost your way, Mom?" Sarah clutched the worn leather of her saddlebag. "No, sir. I'm Sarah Jenkins. I heard you were looking for help." Her voice was hoarse, each word a struggle against the tremor that threatened to betray her composure. She waited, bracing herself for the inevitable questions, the suspicion, the cold dismissal she'd grown accustomed to. His gaze lingered on her face, then swept over her travel-stained clothes, her exhausted horse. He seemed to take in every detail, yet his expression remained unreadable. Finally, he lowered the rifle, resting the butt against the floorboards with a soft thud. "I am," he conceded. "Been trying to work this place alone since it was just me." He paused, and a flicker of something raw, a deep pain, crossed his features before being swiftly masked. "Had some folks come through, but they never stayed. Said it was too much. Said I was too much." A wry, humorless smile touched his lips. "You look like you've seen your share of too much, too, Miss Jenkins." Sarah met his gaze, surprised by his perception. She saw no judgment there, only a shared understanding of burdens carried. "I have, sir," she admitted, her voice softer now. "And I'm not afraid of hard work. Or loneliness." He stepped aside, a silent invitation. "Come in, then. You can stable your mare. There's a warm fire and something stewing on the stove. We can talk in the morning about the work." He looked at her again, his eyes softening almost imperceptibly. "My name's Silas Blackwood. And if you're wondering, no, I don't ask many questions. Folks come here, they usually got reasons for it. Mine's no different." As she stepped across the threshold, the scent of wood smoke and simmering meat enveloped her, a warmth seeping into her frozen bones. It was a humble home, spare but clean, filled with the quiet echoes of a life lived and perhaps a life lost. She felt a strange, unfamiliar loosening in her chest. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't running from something. She was walking towards what she didn't know. But for now, the quiet promise of a warm meal and a moment's respite felt like a miracle. Silas led her to a small enclosed lean-to attached to the house, where a sturdy mare whickered softly. "She appreciate the company," he murmured, stroking his horse's nose. "Good animal, like yours." He glanced at her, a hint of something resembling approval in his eyes. "You handle her well." "She's all I got left," Sarah said quietly, untying her mare's reins. The truth of it tasted bitter on her tongue. All she had left, besides the clothes on her back and a tarnished silver locket hidden beneath her shirt. Inside, the single large room served as kitchen, dining area, and living space. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its hungry flames casting dancing shadows that made the simple furniture seem to shift and breathe. Silas pointed to a crude cot in a corner. "You can set your things there. There's a wash basin by the pump outside, and I heated some water if you want to clean up." He gestured to a steaming kettle on the hearth. Sarah nodded, a lump forming in her throat. Such simple kindness was a foreign language to her now. She set down her saddlebag, its meager weight a stark reminder of how little she possessed. The warmth of the fire was a balm, soothing the raw edges of her weariness. As she dipped a cloth into the hot water, she saw her reflection in the small, grimy mirror hung near the basin. A stranger stared back, gaunt and hollow-eyed, but with a spark of defiance still burning deep within. Silas, meanwhile, stirred the pot on the stove, its rich aroma filling the room. He seemed comfortable in the silence, a quality Sarah deeply appreciated. No forced pleasantries, no prying questions. Just the quiet understanding of two solitary souls sharing a space. He ladled a generous portion of stew into a chipped bowl and set it before her on the rough-hewn table. "Eat," he instructed, his voice gruff but not unkind. "You look like you could use it." She ate slowly, savoring each mouthful of the hearty stew. It was simple, seasoned only with salt and whatever wild herbs Silas had gathered, but it was the best meal she'd had in months. As the warmth spread through her, a wave of exhaustion washed over her, heavy and irresistible. She found herself struggling to keep her eyes open. Silas, observing her, rose from his own meal. "Sleep, Miss Jenkins," he said, his voice low. "The ranch will still be here in the morning, and so will the questions. But for tonight, just rest." He extinguished the single lantern, plunging the room into shadow, leaving only the hypnotic glow of the fire. She lay on the cot, listening to the crackle of the flames and the soft rustle of Silas moving about. He spread a blanket over her, his touch light, almost hesitant. The scent of wood smoke and something uniquely masculine earth and honest sweat enveloped her, surprisingly comforting. She felt a deep, unfamiliar sense of safety. Here, in this remote corner of the world, with a stranger whose sorrow seemed to mirror her own, she found herself breathing a little easier. The nightmares, she knew, would still come. But perhaps, just perhaps, they wouldn't feel quite so alone tonight. The first rays of dawn painted the rough-hewn walls in shades of gray and pale gold when Sarah awoke. The fire in the hearth had dwindled to embers, but the air in the cabin was still warm. Silas was already up, moving quietly about the kitchen. The smell of coffee hung in the air, rich and inviting. He turned as she sat up, his movements unhurried. "Slept well?" he asked, his voice softer in the morning light. Sarah nodded, stretching muscles that still protested the long journey. "Better than I have in months." "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood." He just grunted, pouring her a cup of coffee. It was strong, black, and hot, chasing away the last vestiges of sleep. They ate in comfortable silence, a thick slice of smoked venison and some dried fruit. The quiet felt different today, less tense, more companionable. "So," Silas finally said, setting down his mug, "you said you were looking for work. What kind of work you skilled at, Miss Jenkins?" She took a breath. This was it. The moment she had to prove herself, to show him she wasn't just another burden. "I can cook, clean, mend. I can garden, tend to chickens, milk a cow if you have one. I'm good with horses, can ride, and I'm not afraid of manual labor. My father taught me how to handle a rifle too, if need be." She looked him directly in the eye, determined. "I'm capable, Mr. Blackwood. I just need a place to be useful." Silas listened, his gaze steady, unwavering. He seemed to weigh her words, not for their boastfulness, but for their sincerity. I got a small herd of cattle, few horses, some chickens. My garden went to weeds after she left. House could use a woman's touch, I suppose. It's mostly just me here, you understand. No neighbors for miles. Nearest town is a day's ride. That suits me fine, Sarah said, perhaps too quickly. The isolation was a draw, not a deterrent. He nodded slowly, as if coming to a decision. All right, then. The pay ain't much, not at first. Room and board, small wage. Enough to get by. But if you prove yourself, if you can truly help turn this place around, then we can talk more. He paused, his gaze growing distant. This ranch, it was her dream. I aim to keep it alive. Sarah understood, without him needing to say more. This ranch wasn't just land and livestock. It was a monument, a memory, and he was its lonely, grieving guardian. I understand, Mr. Blackwood. I'll work hard. He rose, pushing his chair back. Then let's start with the garden. It's overgrown, but the soil's good. Might still get some fall vegetables if we work fast. He walked to the door, then stopped, his hand on the frame. He looked back at her, his expression a complex mix of resignation and a hesitant hope. And Miss Jenkins, you can call me Silas. We're going to be partners in this, for better or worse. As she followed him out into the crisp morning air, the vast, silent landscape seemed to stretch out before her, an intimidating but also liberating canvas. The sun was fully up now, painting the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold. This was a new beginning, stark and demanding, but real. No more running. Only the quiet, grueling work of building something from the ground up, perhaps even a new life, brick by painful brick. She spent the morning in the garden, battling stubborn weeds and turning the rich earth. The sun warmed her back, and the rhythmic motion of the hoe was surprisingly therapeutic. Her hands, soft from years of less strenuous work, quickly grew calloused and sore, but she welcomed the ache. It was a tangible sign of effort, of purpose. Silas worked nearby, repairing a broken fence post, his movements efficient and strong. They exchanged few words, but the silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was a shared space of labor, of two people finding their rhythm in the quiet hum of the land. Sarah's heart ached for him. The visible raw grief, years later, was a testament to the depth of his loss. I can do that, she said gently. I'm good with a needle. As the day waned, painting the sky in fiery hues, she made her way into the house. It was a large, sparsely furnished room that Silas had called the bedroom. A simple bed, a chest of drawers, and a small, handmade rocking chair. On the walls hung faded photographs, mostly of a smiling woman with kind eyes, her arm linked with a younger, happier Silas. The grief in the room was palpable, a heavy shroud woven from memories and loss. On the bed lay a pile of clothes. Silas's work shirts, some torn, some missing buttons. And beneath them, carefully folded, a woman's dress made of a simple calico, but still holding the faint scent of lavender. Sarah picked it up, her fingers tracing the worn fabric. It was a profound intimacy, holding the garment of a ghost. She felt a strange kinship with the woman, this silent, unseen presence who had once filled this lonely house with life. She sat by the window, the last light illuminating her work, a needle and thread in her hands. Each stitch she made, mending a tear in Silas's shirt, sewing a button back in place, felt like a small act of healing, not just for the clothes, but for the house, and perhaps for the man who lived in it. And she realized with a jolt, perhaps even for herself. Here, in this quiet, solitary act, she felt a flicker of the purpose she had so desperately sought. That night, after a simple supper, Silas brought out a worn wooden box. He sat by the fire, slowly carving a small bird from a piece of pine. The rhythmic scrape of the knife against the wood filled the silence, a comforting sound. Sarah watched him, fascinated. His rough, calloused hands moved with a surprising delicacy, shaping the wood with care and precision. "My wife. She taught me," he said, without looking up, as if sensing her gaze. "Said it helped me think. Helped me remember." Sarah nodded, understanding. It was a ritual, a way to keep her alive. "It's beautiful," she said softly, admiring the emerging shape of the bird. He glanced at her then, a faint, almost imperceptible softening in his eyes. "You got a story too, Miss Jenkins. I can see it. That's all right. Everyone out here's got a ghost or two following them." The bluntness of his statement startled her, but it wasn't accusatory. It was simply an acknowledgment, a quiet acceptance. She looked into the dancing flames, the memories rising unbidden, the whispers, the accusations, the shattered remains of her reputation, the memory of her father's kind, trusting face, and the shame of having failed him, even in his grave. "I do," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "A whole host of them. That's why I came here, to outrun them if I could." Silas continued to carve, the small bird taking on more detail. "You can't outrun a ghost, Miss Jenkins," he said, his voice low, filled with a deep personal resonance. "They just change their stride, keep up with you, no matter how fast you run. But you can learn to live with them. You can learn to build something new, even with their shadows fallen across it." He looked at her again, his gaze unwavering. "This ranch, it's full of shadows, but it's still standing. And so am I, and now, so are you." His words, simple and profound, resonated deep within her. They weren't a promise of forgetting, but a promise of enduring, a quiet understanding of the human capacity to carry both grief and hope. Days turned into weeks, marked by the rising and setting of the sun, by the rhythm of their shared labor. Sarah cleaned the house until it gleamed, the dust of years banished, the stale air replaced by the scent of beeswax and fresh-baked bread. The garden, once a tangled wilderness, began to yield its bounty: hardy squash, root vegetables, late-blooming greens. She tended the chickens, gathered eggs, and learned to milk the one placid cow Silas owned. Her hands grew strong, her shoulders broad, her spirit slowly mending, piece by arduous piece. Silas, for his part, slowly started to shed some of his deep-seated solitude. He still spoke little, but his silences were less heavy, less burdened. He would leave her small gifts: a perfectly ripe apple from an ancient tree, a particularly smooth stone he found while mending fences, a wild iris he'd plucked from a hidden ravine. Small, wordless tokens of appreciation that spoke volumes. One evening, as the first chill of autumn began to bite, a storm descended upon the ranch with a sudden, brutal fury. The wind howled like a banshee, tearing at the windows, and rain hammered against the roof with relentless force. Inside, the fire roared, providing the only comfort against the encroaching darkness. Silas had been out with the cattle, trying to move them to higher ground. He returned soaked to the bone, his face grim. "Lost a few calves," he said, his voice tight with frustration and exhaustion. "Couldn't get to them in time. This storm came up too fast." Sarah quickly pulled dry clothes from his chest of drawers, warming them by the fire. "Here," she said, her voice soft with concern. "Get out of those wet things. I'll make you some hot tea." He looked at her, truly looked at her, and for a fleeting moment the mask of his stoicism slipped. She saw raw vulnerability there, a man pushed to his limits. "Thank you, Sarah," he murmured, the use of her given name a small, significant shift in their dynamic. It felt intimate, earned. As he changed, she brewed a strong, steaming pot of tea, adding a spoonful of honey. The warmth seemed to seep into his bones, and some of the tension eased from his shoulders. They sat by the fire, the storm raging outside, a cocoon of fragile warmth around them. This land, it gives and it takes, Silas said, staring into the flames. It took her from me, too, in a way. The fever came on fast. Doctor couldn't get here in time. Just like those calves. His voice was rough with unshed tears, a grief that was still raw, even after years. Sarah reached out, her hand hovering for a moment, then gently rested on his arm. His muscles tensed at first, then slowly relaxed beneath her touch. She said nothing, simply offered the silent comfort of her presence, her own understanding of loss. He turned to her then, his eyes dark and troubled, searching hers. She was the heart of this place, Sarah. Without her, sometimes I think I should just let it all go. Let the land reclaim it. No, Sarah said, her voice firm, surprising even herself. No, Silas, this place, it's still breathing. It's still full of her memory, but it's also full of possibility. And you're keeping it alive. That's a testament to your love for her, not a betrayal. She squeezed his arm gently. Sometimes what was lost can never be replaced, but what is built anew can still honor it. He looked at her, a profound weariness etched on his face, but also a flicker of something new, a fragile ember of hope. The storm howled outside, a wild, untamed thing. But inside, by the fire, a different kind of warmth was slowly, tentatively taking root. The storm passed as quickly as it came, leaving behind a world washed clean, air crisp and sharp with the scent of pine and wet earth. The ranch, though scarred, stood resilient. Silas, invigorated by Sarah's quiet strength, worked tirelessly to assess the damage, repair fences, and check on the remaining cattle. Sarah, meanwhile, continued her work, her hands now toughened and capable. One afternoon, while she was hanging laundry on the line, a rider appeared on the horizon, a dark speck against the vast expanse of blue. Sarah's breath caught. Visitors were rare, almost unheard of. A knot of apprehension tightened in her stomach. Had her past finally caught up to her? The rider drew closer, and Sarah recognized the arrogant swagger even before she could make out his features. Sheriff Brody, the same man who had presided over her public shaming in Willow Creek, the man whose disdainful gaze had branded her a pariah. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She instinctively pulled the locket hidden beneath her shirt, her fingers tracing its cold metal. A silent plea for strength. Silas, alerted by the Mare's whinny, emerged from the barn, rifle in hand. He took in Brody's presence, his jaw tightening. He rarely spoke of the outside world, but Sarah knew he held a deep distrust of authority, a legacy perhaps of his own silent grief. Brody dismounted, his spurs jingling, his gaze sweeping over the ranch with an air of proprietorship that made Sarah's skin crawl. Then his eyes landed on her, and a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "Well, well, if it isn't little Miss Jenkins," he drawled, his voice dripping with false civility. "Heard you'd gone to ground. Didn't think you'd end up out here, shacked up with an old hermit." His eyes flickered to Silas, a sneer twisting his lips. "You know who you've got working for you, Blackwood? This one's poison. Turned the whole town against her father, they say. A woman of questionable virtue." Sarah felt the familiar flush of shame rise, hot and stinging. The words were a brand, searing into her skin. She gripped the clothesline, her knuckles white. Silas stepped forward, his rifle still in his hand, though lowered. His face was a mask of cold fury. "She works for me, Sheriff, and she's earned her keep. You got official business here, stated. Otherwise, you're trespassing." Brody scoffed, ignoring Silas. His gaze remained fixed on Sarah, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "My business? Just passing through, Blackwood. Heard some rumors. Wanted to see if they were true. Looks like they are." He took a step toward Sarah. Funny how some women always find a way to land on their feet, no matter what kind of trouble they cause. Sarah took a step back, her breath catching. The old fear, the humiliation, threatened to overwhelm her. But Silas moved, swift and unexpected. He stepped directly between Sarah and Brody, blocking the sheriff's path. His voice, though low, was laced with an undeniable threat. I said, "State your business, Sheriff, or get off my land, now." Brody's face darkened, his hand instinctively going to the pistol on his hip. "Easy, Blackwood. Don't want any trouble. Just making sure everything's proper. Folks in town, they talk. And they remember." He sneered again. "Some things just don't wash away, no matter how far you ride." "Some things don't, indeed," Silas countered, his voice like flint, like a man's word, or his right to protect what's his. "Get on your horse, Sheriff, before I decide you're a threat to my livestock." The implication was clear. Brody held Silas's gaze for a long, tense moment, seeing the unwavering resolve there. He knew Silas Blackwood's reputation for quiet determination, for a fierce independence. With a frustrated grunt, he turned and remounted his horse. "We'll see about that, Blackwood," he spat, glaring at Sarah one last time. "This ain't the end of it. Some debts always come due." With a final contemptuous look, he spurred his horse and rode away, leaving behind a silence heavier than any storm. Sarah stood trembling, her knees weak. Silas turned to her, his expression softening as he saw her distress. He reached out, his hand gently covering hers where it still clutched the locket. "He can't touch you here, Sarah," he said, his voice a steady anchor. "Not while I'm standing." His gaze was fiercely protective, a silent promise. And in that moment, Sarah knew a profound truth. She wasn't alone anymore. The silence might still hold her past, but Silas was building a wall against it, brick by careful brick. The confrontation with Sheriff Brody left a lingering tension in the air, a sense of foreboding. Sarah, though grateful for Silas's defense, felt the familiar shadow of her past creep back into her fragile peace. She saw Brody's words reflected in the occasional flicker of doubt in Silas's eyes, even though he never spoke them aloud. One evening, Silas found her sitting by the fire, tracing patterns on the worn locket. He sat across from her, his gaze gentle but questioning. "What did he mean, Sarah?" he asked, his voice low, free of judgment. "About your father? About questionable virtue?" Sarah's breath hitched. She had known this conversation would come, eventually. She closed her eyes, gathering her courage. "My father, he was a good man, a good, honest man. He ran the general store in Willow Creek. He trusted people, maybe too much." She opened her eyes, meeting Silas's steady gaze. "There was a man, a speculator. He came through town, charmed everyone. Said he had a gold claim, needed investors. My father, he put everything into it, and he convinced others to do the same." She paused, the memory still fresh, still raw. The man disappeared with all their money, and when the townsfolk realized they'd been swindled, when they saw their savings gone, they blamed my father, said he was in on it, that he'd tricked them. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. He tried to explain, to make amends, but they wouldn't listen. They came for him, with torches and pitchforks. I tried to defend him, but there was nothing I could do. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and stinging. "He died a broken man, Silas, of a broken heart," they said. "And the town, they blamed me too. Said I was just like him, maybe worse. Said I led him astray, that I put ideas in his head, that I was a harlot who deserved nothing." Her voice cracked, betraying the years of suppressed pain. "I ran, because I couldn't bear to live in a place where everyone looked at me and saw a thief's daughter, a woman of no account." Silas listened in silence, his expression unwavering. When she finished, he reached across the small distance between them and took her hand, his calloused fingers gently closing over hers. "I believe you, Sarah," he said, his voice firm. leaving no room for doubt. "I don't need to know more than that. I see the truth in your eyes. And I see a woman who fought for her father, who carries his memory with honor, even if others can't see it." His words were a balm to her wounded soul, a testament of faith that she hadn't received from anyone in years. A fragile hope bloomed in her chest, tender and hesitant. "The locket," he said, gently touching the silver chain. "What is it?" "It was my mother's," she explained, her voice softer now. "She died when I was young. My father gave it to me. He said it meant true heart, a reminder to always be true to myself, no matter what others said." Silas nodded slowly. "A good reminder," he agreed. He held her gaze, a profound understanding passing between them, a silent acknowledgement of their shared burdens, their individual ghosts, and the quiet strength they found in each other's presence. In that moment, the shadows of the past seemed to recede, if only a little, vanquished by the warmth of acceptance and the quiet glow of the fire. With the advent of deeper autumn, the work on the ranch shifted. Fences needed bolstering against the coming snow. Wood needed to be chopped and stacked, and the small herd of cattle moved to sheltered pastures. Sarah found herself working alongside Silas more and more, her skills expanding beyond the domestic. She learned to mend harnesses, to track straying cattle, and to recognize the subtle shifts in the weather that portended a harsh winter. Silas, in turn, began to rely on her more, not just for the household chores, but for her quiet counsel and her keen eye. He would often pause his work just to watch her, a thoughtful expression on his face. The easy camaraderie that had once been built on shared silence now blossomed into something deeper, woven with unspoken respect and a growing, undeniable affection. One afternoon, as they were herding the last of the cattle towards the winter pasture, a sudden, blinding snowstorm descended from the mountains. It was early for such a blizzard, catching them unprepared. The wind howled, whipping snow into a frenzy, reducing visibility to mere feet. The cattle, disoriented, began to scatter. "We need to turn them back." Silas yelled over the roar of the wind, his face grim. "If they get too far out, they'll freeze." Sarah nodded, her own heart pounding. She spurred her mare, riding into the thickest part of the blizzard, calling out to the frightened animals, trying to cut them off, to guide them back towards the safety of the ravine they had just left. Silas rode in another direction, his silhouette quickly swallowed by the swirling snow. The cold was brutal, seeping into her bones. Her fingers and toes grew numb, her face stung from the icy pellets. She lost sight of Silas, lost sense of direction, all sound muffled by the storm's fury. Panic, cold and sharp, began to claw at her throat. She was alone, lost in a raging blizzard, miles from the safety of the ranch. Then, through the whiteout, she heard it a faint, desperate bellow, one of the calves. It had wandered too far, its cries growing weaker. Sarah hesitated for a split second, knowing the danger, knowing she should turn back, find her way to shelter. But the calf's cries were too heartbreaking, too vulnerable. She turned her mare, pushing deeper into the storm, following the sound. She found it huddled against a snowdrift, barely visible, shivering violently, its legs too weak to stand. It was a small calf, barely weaned, clearly abandoned by its frightened mother. Sarah dismounted, her hands numb as she tried to coax the calf to its feet. It cried out, a pitiful sound, and collapsed again. She knew she couldn't leave it. She couldn't. A memory of her own helplessness, of being abandoned and alone, flashed through her mind. With a surge of desperate strength, she tried to lift the calf, grunting with effort. It was heavier than she thought, and its legs tangled, making it impossible to move. She knew she was risking her own life, but she couldn't let it die. Not while she was still breathing. She looked around, searching for some kind of shelter, a crevice, anything. Just as despair began to settle in, a figure materialized out of the swirling snow, like a wraith. Silas. His face was etched with worry, snow clinging to his beard and eyelashes. "Sarah," he roared, his voice barely audible above the wind. He saw the calf, saw her desperate struggle. He didn't question, didn't hesitate. He dismounted, and together they managed to hoist the shivering calf onto the back of Sarah's mare, securing it as best they could. "We have to get to shelter," Silas shouted, pointing towards a faint, barely discernible outline of rocks. "There's a small cave there. We can make it." With renewed purpose, they fought their way through the blizzard, the mare stumbling through drifts, the calf whimpering softly. The cave, when they finally reached it, was little more than an overhang, but it offered precious respite from the biting wind and driving snow. They huddled together, the three of them, Silas, Sarah, and the small, shivering calf, a fragile island of warmth in a sea of frozen fury. Silas quickly gathered some dry kindling he always carried, and soon a small fire flickered to life, casting dancing shadows on the cold rock walls. Sarah wrapped the calf in her own blanket, rubbing its cold ears, trying to coax some warmth back into its tiny body. "You shouldn't have gone after it alone, Sarah," Silas said, his voice rough with concern, but with no anger. She looked at him, her eyes tired but determined. "I couldn't leave it, Silas. I couldn't." He met her gaze, and in his eyes she saw not just understanding, but a profound admiration. He knew, intimately, the stubborn compassion that drove her. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her face, his thumb brushing away a stray snowflake from her cheek. The gesture was tender, full of a deep, unspoken emotion that transcended the roaring storm. In the heart of the blizzard, a silent vow was made, a promise of shared burdens and unwavering loyalty. The storm raged for 2 days, trapping Sarah and Silas in the small cave with the shivering calf. They rationed their meager supplies of dried meat and jerky, sharing every morsel, every drop of water from the melted snow. The fire, carefully fed, became their lifeline, a beacon of warmth and light in the overwhelming darkness of the blizzard. During those long hours, huddled together, the forced intimacy of their situation stripped away the last vestiges of their individual reserves. They spoke of their pasts, not in a rush of words, but in quiet, halting confessions, punctuated by the howl of the wind. Silas spoke of his wife, not just of her death, but of her laughter, her dreams for the ranch, the way she could calm a frightened horse with a single touch. Sarah, in turn, spoke more of her father, of his quiet dignity, his unwavering faith in her, even as the world turned against them. "He always said I had a strong heart," Sarah confessed, her voice barely a whisper, as she watched the calf sleeping peacefully near the fire, "even when I felt like it was breaking." Silas reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "He was right," he said, his voice husky. "You do, Sarah. You have the strongest heart I've ever known." He squeezed her hand, a profound warmth spreading through her. The calf, a constant reminder of their shared act of defiance against the storm, slowly began to recover, nuzzling against Sarah's leg, its small bleats a comforting sound. They named him Blizzard, a testament to their harrowing ordeal and the new beginning it represented. When the storm finally broke, revealing a world transformed by a thick blanket of pristine snow, the silence was deafening. The sun, a pale disk in the winter sky, cast long blue shadows across the snow-covered landscape. It was a beautiful, stark world, reborn and silent. They emerged from the cave, blinking in the sudden brightness. The air was still bitterly cold, but the wind had died down. Silas scanned the horizon, his gaze assessing the damage. "The cattle should be safe in the ravine now," he said, his voice filled with a quiet relief. "We need to get back to the ranch. Make sure everything's all right there." The journey back was slow and arduous, the snow deep and treacherous. They took turns carrying Blizzard, the small calf tucked safely in a sack, peeking out with wide, curious eyes. The landscape was breathtakingly beautiful, but also perilous. Every step was a challenge, a testament to their perseverance. As they finally crested the last rise, the ranch house appeared, a beacon of home in the vast white wilderness. Smoke curled from its chimney, a welcoming sign. Their horses, left behind in the storm, had miraculously made their way back to the barn. Inside, the house was cold but intact. Sarah immediately set about rekindling the fire, while Silas saw to the horses and settled Blizzard in a makeshift pen in the barn, safe and warm. When he returned, the fire was roaring, and the scent of coffee filled the air. They sat by the fire, exhausted, alive, the silence between them no longer one of necessity, but of deep, comfortable understanding. Their ordeal in the cave had forged an unbreakable bond, a quiet, profound connection that transcended words. Silas looked at Sarah, her face illuminated by the flickering fire.